President Nelson comes on and my husband comes to me. He's like, come sit on the couch. Let's listen to the prophet. So we listen to his talk, and then he gets to temple announcements, and he goes through all of the ones in foreign countries, and he gets to America, and he says Caldwell, Idaho, and I lose it.
Did you scream?
I did. I was just like, are you freaking kidding me?
As the cold winds of winter sweep in, there's nothing like the warmth of a comforting cup to help you slow down and unwind. This is the season. Let Postum be your cozy companion. Made from roasted grains, Postum is caffeine-free and rich with a smooth roasted flavor. It's the perfect drink for those quiet, chilly mornings. Whether you're curled up with a good book, sharing a laugh with loved ones, or simply watching the snow fall outside, a cup of Postum is the moment you have been waiting for.
Hello, welcome to This Week in Mormons, the Twin Sisters edition. This is a mini edition today.
Yes, this is not a full-blown episode.
I'm Ariane Smith.
And I'm Tiffany Hales. Now, Ariane, should we tell them why we're doing a little mini episode as opposed to a full-blown episode?
This is like not a conference recap because we just didn't have that in us.
Yes.
But this is a highly personal temple conference recap.
Exactly.
We're just focusing on one of the temples.
Exactly. So as you know, this last weekend, President Nelson announced 15 new temples. That's usually his mantra for conferences. We're getting anywhere between 15 and 20 every conference session. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, he starts out with all of the ones that are outside of America, and then he gets to the American announced temples. So the big deal for us was the first temple that he announced that is located in the United States of America is Caldwell, Idaho.
Right down the road from us.
So this is a big deal for Ariane and I, like big, huge, enormous
you
deal.
Have been predicting another temple in Idaho for like the past 3 years.
I have.
When we used to do temple predictions on here, every year you were like, we're getting one in Western Idaho, the very border. Like you were thinking like maybe Payette.
I kept saying Payette. And
so this is very close to what you predicted.
This is close to what I predicted, and nowhere was Caldwell on my radar screen. But as we get into this episode, I'll kind of explain to you why Caldwell makes sense to me now. Mm-hmm. So I think before we start, we need to discuss, where were you when you heard the announcement that it was Caldwell, Idaho?
You don't want to know because I was on my couch with my eyes closed. I was really struggling. I always do. I know myself. Sunday afternoon session every single year. I'm warm. I'm cozy. I'm sleepy. So I was really struggling through the whole session. Like I would pop my eyes open. I would hear bits and pieces. And so when this happened, I was listening, but my eyes were heavy and I could not open them. So I heard none of the foreign ones. And then I heard Caldwell and my eyes did pop open.
Did you go, did I just hear what I thought I heard?
I was a little bit wondering.
Yeah. That's too funny. Well, I too, had I been sitting on my couch during that episode of conference, would have been in a similar state. But I know myself well enough to know if I sit down, that will happen. So I had been running around my house doing things. Of course, conference was on, and I'm doing, menial stuff that I can listen and get some messages from conference without falling asleep. Well, President Nelson comes on and my husband comes to me. He's like, come sit on the couch. Let's listen to the prophet. So we listen to his talk, and then he gets to temple announcements, and he goes through all of the ones in foreign countries, and he gets to America, and he says Caldwell, Idaho, and I lose it.
Did you scream?
I did. I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? I heard no temples after that. In fact, later on that night, I had to go get on the Deseret News to find out where the rest of the American temples would be, because I didn't hear anything after he said Caldwell, Idaho. I was like, no way, no way, no way. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, very exciting.
Anyway, so let's just give a little history here as to why I have been thinking for some time now that we need a third temple here in Western Idaho. So in the Boise area, we have two temples. We have the Boise temple, and that temple went online
85, 84?
84 is when it went online. Now, I was a teenager when they announced the Boise temple, and let me tell you, that was a huge deal then. We'd had a lot of anti-Mormon opposition for 2 or 3 years preceding the announcement. And I remember our dad saying something big is going to happen because of all of the anti-Mormon opposition that we have. And then they announced the Boise Temple. And so that was a very big deal when I was a teenager. And then, of course, I think it was around, I can't remember when they announced Meridian. I want to say it was around 2011, 2012-ish when they announced Meridian. But then it was a number of years before they even selected a site and started building Meridian, because I'm thinking Meridian went online 2017-ish, maybe.
Yeah, it was shortly after we moved here.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it was around 2017. So it was kind of a significant time period from the time it was announced to the time that they did groundbreaking and built it. Now, the temple districts, the way that the temple districts are in Idaho is, at least in the western part of Idaho, is for the Boise Temple. Most of Boise, the Boise Temple is their temple district. Now, you actually have a Boise address, but your temple district is Meridian, which makes sense because you're really not that far from the Meridian Temple. Just to the west of Boise, just to kind of give you geography for those who aren't as familiar with our area, is a city called Nampa and a city called Caldwell. And then there is some distance before you get to the border. And right at the Oregon border, you have Payette and Weiser. So the Boise Temple District, like I said, encompasses Boise, Mountain Home, which is to the east of Boise, and about half of Nampa, I believe, is in the Boise Temple District. I don't know how much of Caldwell, if any, is actually in the Boise Temple District. I don't think a lot of Caldwell is in the Boise Temple District. So, and then the rest is Meridian. So Meridian is really the western half of Boise, Eagle.
So where do people coming over from Ontario, Oregon go?
So
I thought they go to Boise, right?
No,
They don't?
No. So the Meridian Temple District goes as far west as La Grande, Oregon, which La Grande, Oregon is probably about a 2-hour drive from here. So all of Eastern Oregon is in at least my understanding is a good chunk of Eastern Oregon is in the Meridian Temple District, because when we did when we were service missionaries at the temple, we worked with other service missionaries, and there were people that would come over from Eastern Oregon.
Wow.
So if you are coming over from Eastern Oregon to the Meridian Temple, it's a hike. It is literally probably, at least a 2-hour drive. The Meridian Temple is a little bit off the beaten path. There's one roadway that's a fairly major roadway that you can get off the interstate and get on to get to the Meridian Temple, but it's not like the Boise Temple, which is right off the freeway. So I have thought for some time, given the demands on both the Boise Temple and the Meridian Temple and the growth in this area, that Western Idaho was due for a third temple. I really thought that it would be closer to the Oregon border, because to really serve those saints in Oregon, I didn't think the church would want to build it in Oregon because there's just too many regulations in Oregon. So I was like, yeah, they're going to be smart and build it in Idaho. And I had kind of always been predicting Payette, and I thought that it would be a smaller temple, like the size of a temple that went in Burley. We were very shocked when Burley got a temple, because Burley is only 20 miles from Twin Falls, or 20 minutes from Twin Falls, which has an enormous temple at Twin Falls. Anyway, so that has been my prediction for a number of years. So I was quite shocked when they said Caldwell, but then I thought about it afterwards, and I thought, okay, that actually kind of makes sense, because if you were to put it over by the border, there are a lot of saints over there.
Staffing it would be hard.
Exactly. Staffing it would be hard. Putting it in Caldwell makes a lot more sense. You can still cut some of the commute time off, and you have a larger base with which to staff it. So that at that point in time, that made sense to me. And then I thought about our family's history with Caldwell. And I am not even sure I can get through this without crying, because of our family's history in Caldwell.
Aww.
So, my grandparents, our mother's grandparents, arrived in Caldwell in 1942. And when they arrived in Caldwell in 1942, the church didn't even have a building or anything there. In fact, I reached out to my aunt today, because my grandparents lived there all their life, built the church up there in Caldwell all their life. That is where our mother grew up all of her life. And when the Boise Temple first opened in 1984, my grandfather was called into that temple presidency. And so the temple was a very, very the Boise temple in
Yes.
84 was a huge thing for my grandparents. It was a huge thing because they were in the presidency. But I just want to share with you. I reached out to my aunt today and just said, what are your thoughts on the Boise temple? And she said,
Or the Caldwell temple.
the Caldwell temple, excuse me. I was reflecting with appreciation on Mom and Dad's tireless efforts to build the kingdom in their corner of the world. When they moved to Caldwell in 1942, they were sweeping cigarette butts up in the rented space before the branch sacrament meeting. Dad fellowshipped friend after friend into life-changing activity and service. At the funeral for one of those peers, the children, she's put in parentheses my age, shared a tender thought with me. Something like, your dad is spoken of with reverence at our dinner table. He is the reason our dad got active in the church. It has blessed all of our lives.
Aww.
And so, and that really is what we saw of our grandparents and how they served in Caldwell. And at the time I was born, he was the stake president and at that point in time, there was a stake that encompassed both Caldwell and Nampa. And then several years later, that was split off. So that's why the Caldwell Temple is such a just heartwarming big deal to me. When they announced the Caldwell Temple, I turned to my husband and I said, my grandparents and my mother, who are buried in Caldwell, are now rolling over in their collective graves that there's going to be a temple there.
Yes.
So
it's very cool. It's amazing the growth. Like to hear that was in 1942.
1942.
That they didn't even have a church building.
Exactly. They were a branch with no church building.
Like that was what? I can't do math. 80 years ago?
Yeah, 80 years ago.
And that now we have the growth is insane.
It is.
And I mean, this valley has grown just population wise in general. So, but a lot of that growth has been members of the church
from those early pioneers. And not only our grandparents on our mother's side, but also our grandparents on our father's side. They arrived in the Boise Valley and they lived in Nampa, but they arrived here around the same time in the early 40s. And they were also crucial and held all sorts of, leadership positions and crucial in the community and building up the church here. And our father's grandparents were equally as excited when the Boise Temple was announced.
Yeah.
So I am sure, even though they are from Nampa, that they are rejoicing in Caldwell getting a temple. So anyway, so then that brings the next question.
Ooh, now we get to speculate.
Speculation as to where it will be located in Caldwell.
Everybody loves to speculate.
Everybody loves to speculate. This is strictly Tiffany 101. So take it for what it's worth. I have no specialized, she
has no insider information.
I have no insider information.
No inside trading here.
No inside trading here. But I will say this, with the projects that I'm working on with my current job, because I work with the Idaho Transportation Department, there are a number of roadway projects that we have right now that are expanding major thoroughfares. And two of those that I'm working on right now are located within the city of Caldwell. So prior to this announcement, I have spent a lot of time in the city of Caldwell's code. I know where the city limits are. I know where the impact area is, what future zoning is, where development is happening in Caldwell.
Do you know church properties?
Well, I'm coming to that. I am coming to that, my fair weathered friend. So my first inclination was I thought, they should build it out off of, again, I realize a lot of you aren't familiar with the Boise area. In the northwestern part of Caldwell, there's this area called Purple Sage. There's Old Highway 30. There's actually a church building out there on Old Highway 30.
Is it not close to the freeway?
Actually, it is pretty close to the freeway. Okay. It's probably only like maybe a half a mile off of the freeway. Okay. And the church owns a piece of vacant land next to it. And I was looking at that land and I was like, that would be big enough for like a small temple, not a big temple. The problem is this land is not in the city limits of Caldwell. It's not even in the impact area of Caldwell. And so it would be a number of years before it reached the city limits. Now, you don't necessarily have to build a temple within the city limits, but the church is more than likely going to want to build a temple within the city limits for the main reason of you can hook up to city water and sewer. If you don't hook up to city water and sewer, you have to drill a well and have a septic. temples are big enough buildings with a lot of activity.
They probably don't usually do that.
You don't really want to be dealing with a well and septic if you don't have to. You want to hook into the city water and the city sewer and let that be the city's problem to deal with. So then I had to kind of take the Purple Sage site off my radar. So then I started looking and I'm like, okay, the most likely place would either be in a northwest section of Caldwell or a southwest section of Caldwell, because the other areas have a lot of industrial in them. The northwest area of Caldwell has a lot of industrial, and the southwest area of Caldwell has just it has a lot of industrial and commercial and things like that. And the church tends to put these temples in more residential areas if they can. So when I started looking at the northwest area of Caldwell and potential properties over there, I didn't see a whole lot. I was like, I'm not really seeing where this could go. Maybe here, maybe there. So then I was like, okay, so the southwest area of Caldwell is off of Highway 55, which ITD is in the middle of doing a huge expansion of Highway 55 that is going to radically change what Highway 55 looks like. Right now, Highway 55 is one lane in each direction. After this transformation, it's going to be 2 lanes in each direction. It's going to be limited access. Traffic will flow much more freely than it is currently flowing on Highway 55. You go out on Highway 55 right now and it's just a big mess. Anytime you do a major roadway improvement project like that, it spurs development. So there is a lot of development slated out there off of Highway 55. And so I have identified, and I'm not going to say with specificity because they're not owned by the church, a couple of different parcels that potentially could be used for a temple off of Highway 55. Now, I also heard a rumor today that the church was in talks 3 or 4 months ago to buy 17 acres off of Highway 55. So I promptly went to my parcel map for Highway 55 to see if I could identify a 17-acre parcel. I could not identify a 17-acre parcel off of Highway 55. I identified some 20-acre parcels, some parcels larger than that, some smaller parcels, but nothing that was that specific as to 17 acres. Now, hold that thought, okay? So, and I'm not saying the Highway 55 rumor isn't true. I'm just saying I can't, and Highway 55 makes a lot of sense. Not so much for the saints who live in Eastern Oregon, because it really isn't going to cut much time from going to the Boise Temple versus going to Highway 55. It's probably not going to change their commute to the temple that significantly, but it will for the saints that live, and when I should say northern Eastern Oregon as opposed to southern Eastern Oregon, because we also pull from southern Eastern Oregon, the Jordan Valley area. Those saints, that would make a radical change. There is a ton of growth in that Caldwell and Nampa area over there, and that you could, pull into that temple. So it still is a logical spot.
Okay.
I did, however, previously to hearing this 17-acre rumor on Highway 55, identify a 17-acre piece of property that the church currently owns that is not off of Highway 55.
Where's that at?
That one is actually in Middleton. So Middleton is a suburbia type area in Canyon County. It doesn't have a Caldwell address. However, State Highway 44 runs through Middleton, and State Highway 44 connects to the interstate. So if you are looking to serve those saints from Eastern Idaho or from Eastern Oregon, that would cut probably at least 30 minutes off of their commute time. Now, it is not unusual for the church to say the Caldwell Temple, but located in a different city.
Right.
Texas is a great example of that. They had originally announced a temple in, I can't remember what the city was, and then they decided not to go with that city. It's in the Dallas area. They are now calling it the McKinley Temple, but it's not in McKinley, it's in Fairview.
So they kept the original name.
Well, no, the original name was
a different city.
A different city. Okay. And then they decided to call it the McKinley Temple, but they're not locating it in McKinley. They're locating it in Fairview. So this would not be unheard of to have a Caldwell Temple that is in Middleton. Okay.
Is our Meridian temple technically in Meridian, or is it in Eagle?
No, the
It is
Meridian,
in
the Meridian Temple
Because
is
it's right on the edge.
It is right on the
Okay.
edge. The Meridian Temple is technically located in the city of Meridian. So, this particular temple is this particular 17 acres that the church owns is, and again, I have this program called Onyx it's an app that I purchased that I use for my work all the time that shows, you can look up property ownership. And that's how I found the 17 acres was I had gone on this Onyx app, which is technically a hunting.
Sneaky.
I know, which is technically a hunting app.
Oh, really?
I am not a huntress, but it shows me property boundaries and lines and ownership of property and acreage of property, which is, again, in my job, why I use this all the time, because I'm always trying to determine who owns particular parcels of land. So you just go in and you put in Corporation of the Presiding Bishopric, and it pops up every property that they own. And at least in the geographic area that you have limited yourself to. So that is how I found the 17 acres. So it's right off of Duff Lane, which is right off of State Highway 44, which is slated a few years down the road for potentially an improvement project by ITD. So that is a potential. However, I have also heard through the grapevine.
Wow, you hear all the juicy gossip in your neck of the woods.
That I have not worked with any of the development folks for the city of Meridian. I've worked with a lot of the development people in other city, not the city of Meridian, the city of Middleton. I have not worked with the development folks in the city of Middleton because we don't currently have any ongoing projects in the city of Middleton area. So I'm not working with those development folks. But I have lots of friends because I am involved in the development world who have worked with the development folks in the city of Middleton. And apparently there is a little difficulty in the development department in the city of Middleton. There is one individual who likes to throw up lots of roadblocks, is what I have been told. So that leads me to wonder, would that be a smart move? Would that be a smart move?
Would they be tangled up in legal battles?
Exactly. So there's a
plot twist.
There are pros and cons to all of this, and so the bottom line is we don't know where it's going to go. It's highly speculative, and it's really fun to speculate.
It is fun to speculate.
So and it will be very interesting when the church finally does announce a site. I can't imagine that they would have announced the temple without having at least some preliminary idea of where they want a site to go. Again, back to Highway 55, just because I didn't find that they owned anything on Highway 55 doesn't mean they are not in talks, and doesn't mean that they don't have a purchase and sale agreement to buy particular pieces of property, because we don't, unless and until a sale is finalized, the ownership shows as who the existing owner is. So who knows? But we will keep a careful eye on this, and as Twim sisters, we will keep Twim Nation up to date on it.
And this time, unfortunately, since they've taken away the cultural celebrations,
yes,
we won't have any reporting to do on that. That was when we very first started podcasting. Do you remember? The Meridian Temple opened, and we talked a lot about everything that was going on with the cultural celebrations and what we were involved with, and like escorting people through the temple for the open house. So,
and just kind of on an interesting note, because I can't remember who I was talking about this with recently. The last cultural celebration that the church did was for the Meridian Temple.
That was the last one.
It was the last one.
I was going to say that had to be one of the last ones.
And the Meridian Temple was actually dedicated now that I think about it, in November of 2017, because shortly after the Meridian Temple was dedicated, President Monson passed away and President Nelson took over. And I noticed that the cultural celebrations have diminished since he took over.
That's when they went away.
I mean, to a certain extent, I was sad. They are a lot, and they are a lot of production. But at the same time, you think about the number of temples that he is announcing and the record-breaking pace that we are doing temples. It would be impossible.
That would be hard to keep up with.
You could not do cultural celebrations for every temple. That would be a bit too much.
Yeah.
So I think cultural celebrations were something that it had its time and its place. Its time and its place has passed, and now we have moved on to other things. So anyway.
Okay.
All right. Well, Twim Nation, thank you for joining us for this mini episode of Twim, which was probably a little longer than we thought it was going to be. But Twim Sisters here, we just could not contain our excitement about the Caldwell Temple, and we just wanted to share it with y'all. And hope you stay on board with us for this journey of building another temple here in Western Idaho.
All right. Thanks for listening.